Hello and welcome to another episode of This Expat Life. I'm your host, Amanda Maxime, and today I have a very special guest in the online studio. His name is Kees van Rij, and Kees is a former ambassador from the Netherlands. And having lived abroad for most of his youth, educated in Dutch and French, and later trained as an historian, Kees opted for a career as a diplomat for the Netherlands. And most of his international professional work focused on European-related issues, with postings in The Hague, Brussels, where he was twice, Greece, Spain, and Turkey, as well as Korea, Peru, and Brazil. And this is where I met Kees. As a diplomatic advisor of the European Union, he was involved in various complicated negotiations and crises between the EU and Russia, and not the current one, but the one in 2000 and 2005. He learned how unpredictable foreign policy often is and how difficult it can be to find acceptable outcomes. As a negotiator, he learned the importance to understand what moves the other side in order to get to a solution, as well as keep those who try to overburden you with precise instructions at the Home Office at some distance, while knowing one's red lines. And moving with his wife and children every 3 to 4 years was both exciting and challenging, and this is something that we will also talk about in this interview. And Kees and I worked together at the Dutch embassy in Brasilia, where Kees was the ambassador and I was a junior diplomat. But when there was a lot of upheaval about deforestation and the Amazon being on fire during the Bolsonaro administration, Kees and I worked closely together to inform the ministry, engage stakeholders, and find ways to leverage our influence as the Netherlands. And this is when I learned so much from him. And this is also why I'm very honored to have him on the show. Welcome, Kees.
Good morning. Good to see you. And hi.
Hi, good to see you. Where are you calling in from?
I'm sitting in my office, study, because I'm retired, so no office, but study.
And where's the study?
With my studies in my house in The Hague, and it's raining outside, and I'm sitting in front of my window. I'm relaxed. I usually sit here in the morning to check news and to do my emails and things like that. So it's a comfortable place for me to be.
Nice. It looks very nice. And yes, it's a very gloomy day today. It's raining a lot, quite different from the days that we had in Brasilia, where the sun was often shining. So that's also difficult about returning home.
Absolutely. Actually, Brazil was a country without seasons. At least Brasilia was without seasons. You had either humid or very dry. Remember,
exactly.
Same temperature.
Yeah.
So here, of course, we have 4 seasons, and the seasons are more visible.
Yeah. Although today it looks like autumn, even though it's summer. Yep. But Kees, before we start to talk about your previous expat life and what you did during your career at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I'm really curious. Well, actually, I know it already, but I know most of my listeners are very curious about what does an ambassador exactly do? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, well, it's a good question, and it's a very obvious question because it's not always very well known what diplomats do, but certainly also what ambassadors do. Well, an ambassador is the official representative of the government of country A to country B. So you have a system in international relations where relations between countries exist, very often through treaties or multilateral agreements like the United Nations, or European Union, or NATO, or other regional formats. And in that international structure, and that's already for hundreds of years the case, countries have representatives of their governments in the other country. So an ambassador, first of all, he represents his head of state or his government in the other country. So all the official relations, all the official communications, he is the liaison. He is the person who explains, who translates the instructions from his government to the other government, requests, things to promote, things maybe to deviate in another direction, to influence. in a way that is convenient to the country that he represents. So that is the first part. The second part is that the ambassador is responsible for the embassy. The embassy is composed of other diplomats coming from the country that he represents, in our case, the Netherlands, as well as local staff, because most embassies are heavily dependent also on good quality people from the country itself, who do all kinds of jobs within the embassy. And a very important responsibility of an ambassador is to look after the well-being of the compatriots in a given country. That is, in my case, I also had the oversight over the Dutch community in several countries, which means passports, which means if there are complications with the government in question, how can we help? Can we give advice on lawyers, for instance, if there is a litigation issue? If there are major accidents, can we help? Of course, there are all kinds of private organizations such as tourist assistance and all that, but very often embassies, and that is, of course, the ambassador in the first place, play an important role there. And then you have, for instance, Dutch people being traders and merchants. Very often, you also help Dutch business to find the right entries, and if there are problems, you can help them. You can give them introductions and so on to conduct business, both sides, from country A to country B and the other way. So those are a few important issues, and then you have all kinds of, I would say, important issues, international important issues. For instance, the discussion on migration, the discussion on climate, the discussion, you already mentioned that the deforestation issue in the Amazon, which is a concrete issue in the case of Brazil and Latin American countries. What can we do to work together with the government of Brazil, for instance? Can we help with technical solutions in order to protect the forests better? Of course, the government in question, Brazil, was responsible for that. It's their territory after all. But international cooperation very often is important to bring that to an even higher standard. Always at the request of the country in question, of course. This is not something you impose, but you try to find common ground. And the Netherlands doesn't do that alone. As an ambassador, I didn't do that on my own. First of all, I did it with a team in the embassy, of course. You were very much involved in it at the time. But also you look for other like-minded countries to work together, for instance, with countries of Europe, European Union countries or other countries, to see with the government of Brazil, in this particular case, where can we help? What can we do to move towards a more comprehensive and more acceptable situation in terms of cooperation in climate issues, for instance? So you work on those issues. Now there are countries where, for instance, the consular issues are very important. Consular issues relate to everything that has to do with the Dutch communities overseas. So it's your compatriots that sometimes need help or that have specific issues. And there, for instance, when I was ambassador in Spain, this was a huge issue because we had hundreds of thousands of Dutch people living there in Spain, looking for the sun, understandably. And in summer, sometimes millions. And there are always issues. So you try to help. You have honorary consuls all over the coast to assist when there are specific issues, that can talk to the authorities, that can help to solve problems. Same thing was also true for Greece, where very often you had issues during summer with youngsters who drank too much, for instance, or things like that, and then try to solve issues, always accepting and respecting, of course, the rule of law of the country in question. So it's a continuous balancing act between the ambassador and his staff, and of course the country in which he operates, because you do not operate in your own country. You have to accept the rules and habits and customs of the other country. So that requires flexibility, it requires balance, it requires respect for things that may be different and maybe you don't agree with.
Yeah.
So this, I think, a few points of attention when it comes to what an ambassador does.
It almost makes me want to go back to the ministry, your introduction. So just one quick question about this is it anything similar to The Diplomat, the series on Netflix?
That's a good question, because I looked at that, of course, with a lot of interest. And I think many people with our background who have worked in diplomacy looked at that series with great interest. Now, I would say that it has very little to do, the series, The Diplomat, has very little to do with what diplomats really do. Diplomacy is not 24 hours a day exciting. There are moments that are extremely exciting and extremely, you're at your edge. But most of the time, you have to operate and be patient, because things don't always work the way you want. So when I look at a series like The Diplomat, where all the time there is action and all the time it's at the highest level of international tensions and all that, that's simply not true. There are situations, of course, where this happens. But I have learned from a very experienced ambassador who died long time ago, but who once told us, my group of young diplomats, when I arrived at the ministry in the early 80s, who said to us, being a diplomat is not an extremely difficult job. Of course, you need the right character and all that, but and you have to have your academic formation or right education. But apart from that, it's not it's not like a rocket science specialist who is triple A academic at the University of X. No, you have to have a clear mind. You have to be able to take clear choices. But the only problem is that certainly when you are far away representing your country, in a country where, it's also because of the time difference, you are sometimes confronted with a situation, and you cannot check this with your home office back in the night. You have to take the decision on the spot. The problem is that nobody ever tells you when that moment is. So it's about 5 minutes per month. You will meet something completely unexpected, and you are the one who has to solve it. And you cannot phone to the ministry. You have no communication, because it has to be done now. And that is, of course, something that is sometimes forgotten, that it's a job that you are active 24 hours a day. So, of course, you have a private life, but you always have to be sharp, because unexpected things can happen that you have to solve.
Yeah.
So in The Diplomat, this 5 minutes every 24 hours is 24 hours all the time. And that is simply not true. So that's one thing. The second thing is that I saw the protagonist, the lady ambassador of the United States, walk in and out of the Foreign Office in London as if it's her own turf. And that simply is true, because even the ambassador of the United States has to be announced and cannot just walk into the office of the foreign minister, who in that series always appears to do nothing. He's always there to receive her, and that's simply not true.
Yeah.
One detail that I think was very well done, and that has to do with an important part of our work as diplomats, that is to gather information, because you are not here in The Hague, other diplomats come to the ministry and they ask for information. But when you are outside, somewhere far away, you are the one who has to get information, because it's all about information in order to take decisions or give advice and so on. So what you have is a situation whereby you You go to these cocktail parties, you go to these National Day receptions, you go to dinners, you go to lunches, you go to breakfasts. This is to gather information. Now, most of that, of course, is done in the form of drinks in the evening, cocktail parties, things like that. And many outsiders think, that's where these diplomats go and they drink champagne and they have a good time and they get drunk and they eat too much and always fantastic this and that. But that's really not true. The real life is that you go there as a diplomat, you go there to gather information. So before I go to a reception with my wife, usually, we say, okay, I have to see A, B, and C, because the thing I want to raise with that person, a politician or a parliamentarian or a civil servant in a given country, it's not enough to go and ask for a formal appointment in his office, because it's an issue that can be done very quickly. Mm-hmm. So you moment and you meet that person at the reception and you talk to A, B, and C and you go away, because that's the way I do it. And sometimes I have a second reception, right? And you go there again and you have 2 or 3 people in mind that you would like to say something to, or you want to solve an issue. Now, if you go to these receptions, and this is the link with the diplomat, is that, and that's very well done, because every time we went to a reception, we were having a light meal back home, drink some water or tea, go to the reception and do not eat and maybe drink non-alcoholic beverage. Mm-hmm. And then you go home again and then you eat properly, or you have a little bit more to eat. Because eating at this reception, and with all respect to national days and the fantastic cuisine of all the countries that are represented in a given country, it's always too much. And if you do this 2-3 times an evening, after a few years, you have put on many, many kilos, which is not very healthy.
Yeah.
And that in the diplomat is very well done, because at a given moment, she said, do we have to go to that national day? And then the husband, the partner of the ambassador, says, let's do that, but let's first eat. And right, so that's something in the research they've done very well, because they think all diplomats know how to do that. So you see in that series that sometimes it's completely exaggerated, and flying in private jets and things like that. It's completely crazy. But some details are very well done, and this is one of those details that they did the research properly. Yeah. So that's be my short comment on that. But to the second sequence.
Yeah, nice, thank you. And actually, you touch upon something interesting, because I know from your work that you sometimes have receptions 3 times in a week, and I can imagine if you've been working all day. I'm speaking from my own experience, but I am not an extrovert. So for me, when I spend the whole day working with colleagues, and then I also have to go to 1 or 2 receptions in the evening, I'm exhausted afterwards. And because it's a lot of contact with people, a lot of chit chat. And I can imagine that for you, you can't really not go. You have to be there at your position. But it means you're always on. You're always working. Like you said, you work 24/7. There can always come like this moment with the 5 minutes you have to take a decision on the spot. But it's also about those things that you really always have to be present. You have to be on. You have to be polite. You have to be interesting. You need to have something meaningful to say. How do you deal with that?
Well, it's a very good question, because you have to have, and simply you don't know. When I applied, let's say over 40 years ago now, for the Foreign Service, having finished or finishing my history studies, I really didn't know that it would entail all this. So it's something that you have to have in your character somewhere. I have to be a little bit like a chameleon. Yeah. Take the local colors. Try to, without losing your personality, of course. And this is the friction you always have, combined with the fact that it's 24 hours a day. Because I had several times, for instance, at 1 or 2 in the morning on a Saturday night to a Sunday morning, that I got a call from The Hague, there's a crisis, can you intervene? Twice in in Turkey, for instance, but also in Greece. I had several of these moments, and that is, as you say, it's tiring. At the same time, it gives you a lot of adrenaline if you have that disposition. That means you have to have this sort of flexibility. You have to be able to adapt to a situation that you do not necessarily control.
Mm-hmm.
You know what language to use. Language is the only tool that diplomats have in the end, right? We do not have other means than language, international language, diplomatic language, sometimes very straightforward language, sometimes very protective language, hidden language. So it's not always easy, but you have to have something in your character that makes you have to be curious. Curious is extremely important. Curiosity. What do others do? Where can I find information? Where can I do things? I think that is extremely important. If you're not curious as a character by character, then diplomacy will be a hard job for you. You have to also be able to improvise and be out of regular schemes. So 9 to 5 is all very nice. Of course, if you're office, you have to do your paperwork and write reports and all these things. But you also have to be able to drop everything and then go somewhere something is happening.
Yeah.
Short notice. So very often you have to have that in your character. So people that are uncomfortable with that, I think they will not be very happy in this type of career, in this type of life. Now, this is true for diplomacy, but I guess this is the same for people who are representing companies or NGOs working outside as expats as well.
Yeah.
It's not limited to diplomacy. But diplomacy, of course, has this specific issue that you represent your country. And that is a different league in the sense that you are protected by agreements dealing with immunity and things like that. So you have to be able to do your job without the country in which you work is intervening in your work, because you have to have this impartiality vis-a-vis that country. So it's and you have to know how to deal with that, right? So, for instance, I don't know how that was with you, but I've always been extremely cautious driving my car. Very easy to drive very fast and get a ticket and throw the ticket away, because as diplomats you could ignore it. Not anymore, but there was a time that you could. I've always been extremely cautious with that. Always, and also with parking places and things like that. Don't do things that enrage or make complicated the relations with the country which you operate, because people already have these prejudices against diplomats. So you have to be very cautious. You have to be also know your place. You have to be humilde, as they say in Spanish. So it's finding that balance is every time is different, because every country is different. And so maybe if I jump to the next remark I can make about that, if you go somewhere as a diplomat or even as another expat, I think the most important thing is to get some notion of the language. The language is very important. Of course, everybody speaks English, certainly when you are a diplomat. Although when you go down in the countryside, it's not obvious at all. To have somebody who helps you, or at least do an effort yourself. But knowing the language is important, and maybe more important to know what is behind words, because very often words mean, even if you use the same word, it means something completely different from one to another.
Yeah.
I learned, for instance, in Greece, when I was ambassador there between 2008 and 2012, that when you discuss an issue with a Greek civil servant or a Greek politician, and you expect a negative answer, they will never say no. They will never do this.
Yeah.
The way to say no in Greek is to simply react.
So for the people who are listening, sorry, for the people who are listening to the podcast, because not everyone is watching the video, can you explain what you just did?
I gave a upward movement of my head with a small noise of my tongue, meaning no, but they would never say no.
Yeah.
And so you have to understand this type of language. It's a kind of anthropological communication. For instance, in another country, in Asia, very often, I served in South Korea a long time ago. They would never say no, for instance. And when they say yes, it means not I agree with you. It means I understand that you said something. These are very simple that many people will recognize. But you have to not only understand that that's what is meant, but also then make the translation on what you can do. Yeah. And sometimes some person says yes, it means basically no. But that type of translation you have to be able to make. I recall also that very often legal situations are very different. I remember in Korea a long time ago, in the mid-80s, was a young secretary in the trade department in the embassy there, that I had the visit of a Dutch businessman who had representing a factory in the Netherlands that produced a certain article, and they had engaged in a joint venture with a Korean company. And they had signed a contract. And after some time, the Korean company basically took over everything. And the Dutch company complained, said that that's not in the contract. And the problem was that came to us, and I said, so what happened? And he said, yes, well, we had this joint venture, and I travel here once or twice a year to look from the Netherlands to look after our joint production. And they've basically taken over everything, and I'm completely out of it now. So I said, so what, you signed a contract? Yes, signed a contract. And so how did it work? Well, I showed the gentleman in question, the Korean gentleman in question, the contract. And then he started laughing, and I said, yes, of course, that's a contract. But you know, I'd rather break my words than break my back, because, you know, I have to run my own company. So it meant also that we have a very legally minded society, legally minded, organized society in well, let's say Europe or North America and most parts of the world. But in some parts of the world, if you sign a contract, it's just a nice intention. But if the situation changes, then the contract can be changed as well. But the whole point is, of course, that you sign a contract in case things change. Because if things are okay, you don't have to change anything. You don't have to look after the contract. The contract is there to protect you when things change and to find solutions. So this was a typical example where a Dutchman with a Korean gentleman used the same words, but the meaning was completely different. And from then on, I advised all Dutch people who came to the embassy to ask advice on joint ventures and things like that. They said, always station or detach somebody from your office in the Netherlands in that company, in particular signing checks, so that you have control over the money. And I think that's what most of the companies do, and the big companies do it anyhow. But a small company of maybe a few people in the Netherlands that make a certain thing, you know, it's a small to medium-sized industry. They do something with a company in Korea, and that in those days, now things have completely changed because Korea is member of the OECD and it's much advanced country. But in those days, there was a lot of pioneering. Yeah. Those are lessons that you learn, and then you share with the people that come in that country for the first time. So, but it took some time to find out that that's the way how it works.
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I think diplomacy is such an interesting career. There's so much that you learn, that you see, the people that you meet. It really enriches your life. And I've only worked at the ministry for 7 years. You've worked there, I think you said, for over 40 years.
Yeah, for about
Yeah. I know for myself that it's still part of my identity in a way. It was hard letting go of that career. I can only imagine when your entire career has been spent there. So I'm also really curious to know for you, how did your career as a diplomat, as an ambassador, form you? How do you look back on your career?
Okay. Well, first of all, I think with hindsight, I think I wouldn't have done something else. You have some situations say, well, I've done this, but I'd rather be maybe a professor or a teacher, something, or maybe in business or something else. I don't think I would have chosen another path. It's so in that sense, it has formed me. I think I have learned to, and you alluded to that in your introduction, I have learned to always, when I talk to people or I meet people for the first time, to not to make a judgment too quickly, to wait a little bit. Sometimes you meet people that you think at first sight, well, I don't think I relate very much to that person, his ideas, her ideas. But then if you wait a little bit, you take some time, and then all of a sudden you see that, you made a mistake and there may be something else behind that person that make it interesting or different. So patience, I think that's important. Not take a judgment too quickly. Think out of your natural habitat. Of course, we are very comfortable here in this part of the Netherlands, this part of Europe.
Yeah.
But it's always good to look at the bigger picture, and that things very rarely come to you automatically. You have to work for it. That things stay as they are, or you can even improve them. These are things that I think have formed me, and that never take things for granted, in the sense that we have this fantastic country, rule of law. Of course, there are problems, by the way, that I encounter in the Netherlands. And I'm sure there are big problems in the sense of the limits of growth, climate, all these things. I'm sure that these are big problems. But comparing to the problems that are challenges in some of the countries where I worked and lived, peanuts. We live in a paradise.
Yes.
And every time I return to the Netherlands from a faraway country, where, of course, I was always in a kind of privileged situation as a diplomat, and you come back to the Netherlands and say, what a fantastic country. But that's not always how it's perceived by the people that live here permanently, of course. We know.
Recognize that, yeah.
Exactly. So these are things that forms you over the years, and that make you a bit more cautious about things, and also where the real challenges are. Very often, and you see that, of course, also in our own political environment in this country, where people are extremely excited about certain things, for instance, in our parliament, and that you think, but why are they not discussing this or that? Right? So it's which is a much bigger problem now, relating to I don't know, Ukraine or things like that. So it's very often gives you a different perspective, not a better perspective, but a different perspective.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. I think I especially saw it during the Corona crisis, where so many people here in the Netherlands were just complaining about our government, not wanting to take the vaccinations. And, I respect everyone's decision, but I also thought, but you don't live in a country where there's no place for you in the hospitals anymore, where they run out of oxygen. We both were in Brazil when the Corona crisis hit. We lost a colleague to Corona as well. So we've definitely seen another side of it, and it's not everyone sees it that way if you've only lived in the same country, in a paradise country. So
absolutely. It took some let's say some effort to convince people back in The Hague that the situation was extremely dramatic when we were there. And it took some time before we could take the proper measures by having the proper vaccination, as you recall.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you were already gone by then,
yeah.
I think. But no, this was not very easy to deal with. But in the end, I think if you push hard enough, they came with the right solution. But no, definitely. And I recall well, let's say in particular also when the number of flights were reduced. We had 17 flights a week from Brazil to and from the Netherlands. At one stage there were 2 and only cargo, no passengers. And that gives you a very strange feeling, because that means you cannot go back when you want to go back.
Yeah.
And but that was a very critical moment. You have to deal with that. I think we had to. You were already gone by then. You were still there, I think. But you have to. Well, with the team in the embassy in a crisis like that, you have to keep calm.
Yeah.
Certainly, as the leader of the pack, because everybody's very nervous about it. People were confined to their houses, very often apartments, in Brasilia, which is not such an easy city at all. So to keep the spirits up, well, this was quite a challenge. But in the end, I think we all did well. We lost a colleague, as you said, which was traumatic. But and then we took the proper measures by giving the right vaccination. Not only to the diplomats, but also to all the local staff and in-living families.
Yeah.
That was, I think, extremely important to keep the spirit together and to give the confidence that we were dealing with that in the proper way.
Yeah, and this is actually something else that you say, like you're the leader of the pack. And when I was living and working in Brazil, I felt a big responsibility for my work and also for my actions. But I always knew, like, I'm under your wing in the end. I'm under your responsibility. But I can imagine if you are the ambassador, it all comes down to you. You have to take the proper decisions. And also, you start somewhere new all the time, where you don't have that strong connection with colleagues yet. You don't know how much you can trust them. I can imagine that's a challenge again and again. How is that for you, or was that for you?
It's true. As an ambassador, I served 4 times in Greece, Spain, Turkey, and Brazil. And in the ministry once, because I was a director there, European Union department. So, of course, you build up, because every time in the career previous you being the boss, right? You make every time you go up a little bit higher, get a little bit more responsibility, and at one stage you are the one who has to take the responsibility. Of course, this is not a carte blanche, because you operate within all kinds of limits and rules and balances and checks. That's the Dutch civil service. It's based on certain values and rules, so you always operate within that. But in the end, you have to find your own balance in that new situation. So how do you deal with that? When I was appointed for the first time as an ambassador to Greece, I recall very well that I had basically no idea, how the situation would be. So the first thing you do is you start reading about Greece, simply history, society, what are the challenges, you start talking to people. So I talked to my predecessor. I visited him before I went. I could do that from The Hague because Greece is not so far away.
Yeah.
To see how the residence, the house where the ambassador lives, how that was. How do you operate here? What are the basic habits? Because every country has its own ways. How's the security? Things like that. Schools. In this case, we still had our youngest daughter, who in the end chose to stay in the Netherlands, but she could have come with us. So you have to find out what the situation is. What is the context in which you operate? The physical context. And then, of course, there is, what are the challenges? What are you going to do? So you talk to the specialists in the ministry, you talk to other ministries, you talk to, in my case, the Greek ambassador in The Hague. So very slowly, there's a picture emerging from that. And then you get a kind of general instruction from your ministry, usually from the minister or on his behalf, by a other civil servant who deals with that part of the world, and you get a set of instructions, global instructions. This is what you're supposed to do in the next 3-4 years. We would like you to achieve this and this and this. But those are usually things in very general terms, right? These are promote good relations, make sure there are regular contacts, things like that. Sometimes a specific issue, if there is a specific issue, which is not always the case. And so I found out, well, that's all very nice, but then within half a year, I could throw it away because there was an enormous crisis in the Eurozone that nobody really understood what was going on, because we were confronted with a huge crisis, a budgetary crisis in Greece, which was contaminating to the rest of the Eurozone, in terms of the strength of the euro, in terms of budget discipline, and trust, basically. So these were completely uncharted waters, and nobody knew anything about this, not even the ministers of finance in other Eurozone countries, like the Netherlands. So how do you operate? So you start improvising, because there are no rules for this. So you start talking left, right, start to find out what's going on. In my case, in the Greek case, I had the advantage that I had been working a lot in European structures before. And under my guard, when I was Director Integration Europe, I assisted my other colleagues and the ministers and the Prime Minister to renegotiate the treaty that became the Treaty of Lisbon. That's something that we operate under the Treaty of Lisbon right now. And also where a number of decisions were taken on, also earlier on, under the Treaty of Maastricht, Treaties of Amsterdam, that the European Central Bank, what they were doing, how let's say, the overall structure was working. So I knew about that. I'd worked for many, many years in Brussels in the context of those issues. So when this crisis happened in Greece, which contaminated very quickly to the rest of the Eurozone, whereby it became a big problem for everybody, I had some advantage vis-a-vis my other European colleagues who were mostly bilateral specialists, not having worked with European structures. So I knew my way very quickly. And so I could find a way to help the Netherlands government, in particular the Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the State Secretary of Foreign Affairs, to deal with the politics of this issue. Whereby, for instance, I discovered that Greek representatives abroad in Brussels or other places, they would give a certain explanation or a certain context to what was going on, whereas in home politics in Greece, there was a completely different dynamic. And I could explain the internal dynamic to my friends in The Hague or in Brussels. They say, well, they say this in Brussels, but the situation in Greece actually is quite challenging because it has other issues. And so this is what diplomats also do. They try to look beyond the news, beyond the specific issue of news reporting. Diplomats try to scratch under that surface, and would report on those things that you cannot Google. And this was my definition for reports that I always try to do political reporting back home about the motives, about the undercurrents in the country in question when it's about the broad movement, the broad decisions that would be taken, and particularly in a situation of a crisis, of course, because in a normal situation, you don't have to deal too much with that, but in a crisis situation, you have to, that you see things or you hear things, and that's why you are a diplomat. You have to find out things that others may not find in the public domain so quickly, including journalists, that you would then use and analyze in a proper way for your authorities, things that cannot be read in another newspaper.
Yeah.
So that's what I also said to the ministry. I will not overburden you with all kinds of political reports. I will not copy things from newspapers, because you can read the newspapers. I will only write to you when I have something that you cannot possibly Google. And
Nice.
that's how it worked very often. Now, as I said, and coming back to your earlier question, what do you do to prepare when you go to a foreign country? Well, you can prepare for everything, but this happened, and it had nothing to do with all the preparations I did.
Yeah.
You see, and the same thing in a way was true for Greece when we were confronted with, with Turkey, when we were confronted with this huge migration challenge from Syria to what eventually became the Turkey migration deal. Extremely complicated, politically very complicated. We happened to be in the presidency of the rotating presidency of the EU, which means much less today than it used to mean in the past, but still it plays a certain role. So you have to be very creative to find proper ways to deal with such a sudden crisis. And I've had these situations whereby consular challenges, two of them in Greece, where basically you have never been trained to deal with it, but you grab the situation, you try to improvise. I had one case, I can tell that, one case of a Dutch journalist who was arrested, and it's always on a Saturday night at 2 a.m. So they call you from your bed. The person in question had the phone number from my predecessor. So she calls me, said, I'm in a police station somewhere in the southeast of Turkey, and they're keeping me here and all that. Well, so long story. I tried to talk to the authorities and all that, but no, she was kept there. There was a crisis for a number of days, but I happened to be a few days later in Konya, which is a city in the sort of southern Anatolia, which is city of origin of the then Prime Minister Davutoglu. So this was his electoral turf. And there was an interland football between the two national teams of the Netherlands and Turkey, a friendship tournament. And I was leading it was in my first 2 weeks, I was leading a small trade delegation there, and we would all go to the football match. And I was sitting, in the same tribune, how do you call it, the same seating where the Prime Minister was also. But I didn't have not yet formally presented my credentials to President Erdogan at the time. So you have to wait until you present your credentials before you can operate fully as an ambassador. I was dealing with this issue with the journalists. And I said to The Hague, well, I'm sitting in this football match. I'm sitting very close to Mr. Prime Minister Davutoglu. I can try to talk to him. Oh, please, can you do this? The Hague said, please do. So I asked I had the translator with me from the embassy, and I said, can you talk to one of the advisors of Mr. Davutoglu so that I can greet him during the pause, right, the entr'acte? And I said, yeah, but there are all kinds of security people surrounding him. I said, yes, but there's one with glasses, so maybe he's like more an advisor. People with glasses, they're not boxers. Talked to him and talked like this, and he gave me a thumbs up. Okay, you can talk to the Prime Minister during the pause. And that's what I did. So he came to me and said, I hear you are the new ambassador. And at that stage, the Turkish team was leading 3-1. And everybody in the stadium was very happy. The Dutch people were not happy, but everybody was very happy on the Turkish side. So the Prime Minister said, Ambassador, very welcome. And I said, can I congratulate you? You're leading 3-1. What a fantastic team. What an atmosphere in the stadium. And you're fantastic supporters who are very positive. And then he said, yes, indeed, Ambassador, I'm very happy. You can ask me anything. So I said, I have this one issue with the journalist. His face then was a little bit more serious. And he said, wrong person, wrong time, wrong everything. Well, it was a long story. But then I said, her family is very worried. I improvised. I said, I didn't know. Is there something that we can tell the family that things are going to be okay, instead of making a more political issue about the issue why she was arrested, right?
Yeah.
So I tried to see it in a more human way. And then he looked at me and he said, okay, my office will contact you in the coming days. Have a nice time here, Ambassador. Look forward to meeting you again, blah, blah, blah. So we sit out. In the end, they won 4-1. I was the only person in the entire stadium, being Dutch, who was very happy that we had lost, because that had given me a more positive feeling, or he had a more positive feeling, in his electoral situation, where that helped him, of course, and that maybe helped a little bit him wanting to be generous to me in a way. Mm-hmm. Maybe, I don't know. But the question, the situation is that a few days later, she came out of that prison, and she was sent back to the Netherlands on a plane. Now, this is, and the ministry in The Hague was extremely happy that it had been dealt with. This is something you do not learn from a book. This is this is improvisation, but it's not improvisation like you would do on the first day you stepped into the ministry and said, I'm going to be a diplomat. This is also the unsaid development in your own character, understanding of how relations work between governments over a long period of, 20, 25 years before. Yeah. Never tested, and now it was tested. I don't know if it made a difference, but I would not have been able to do that if I would have been a very junior, not in the same. Yeah. You see, so these are things that you do not learn. You cannot never get an instruction for. You don't have the time to call for an instruction. No, you don't want instruction because you want to solve this issue. Yeah. Right. And I had a second case that was a more famous case, which has also been in the press by the Dutch-Turkish citizen Ebru Umar, the journalist. That is a similar situation. But it's so these are the things that you are trained for to solve without ever being tested. Yeah. And then when the moment arrives, it can be a success or it can be a failure. And you have to deal with failures as well, because very often in diplomacy you have failures, or you have things that you simply cannot fix. It just is not possible. Yeah. And it's not only successes, because of course, everybody likes successes. You like to solve, you like to put a tick behind the box, I've solved that issue. But very often things simply don't work. Yeah, it's true. You also need to deal with that. Yeah. In case maybe, I can listen to your diplomacy and ambassador stories for hours, I think, but maybe on the more personal side, you've lived in, let me think, about 7 countries as a diplomat. So, you go there for a couple of years, 3 to 4 years usually. What was it like to start over again and again on the more personal side with your family, with your kids? And the last one, or the last few ones, were without your kids as well. Can you share something about that? Always a challenge. And I've also learned that for families, this is not so easy. You have many advantages as a diplomat. We are with your partner, you're with your children. It's not always the case that children like to move every couple of years. Some children are very suited for this. They always make friends. But some children don't like that at all, and they have to. They need more continuity, more more permanent base to work from, to live from, schools, friends, and so on. So this is not always easy. And this is also why very often you hear about children of diplomats who went to different schools and who have then some problems adapting when they're back in the Netherlands. Not all of them, but very often this is the case. This is the downside of this life, and you always have to look while you are moving around in the world, how you can combine the work with that type of situation. I was lucky and privileged in a way that when after the 2 postings in South Korea and in Peru, we were sent to Brussels for a period, and then we were sent back to the Netherlands, and then back to Brussels, and then back to the Netherlands. That means that in terms of schooling, it was more or less continuous. They went twice to the same school in Brussels, and they also went to the schools here in The Hague, which gave them a more permanent base, and so a better preparation for when they went to Dutch universities, all 3 of them, my 3 children. So in that sense, I was lucky. But I've also heard numerous stories about moving from one school to another, and really having a hard time when you come back to the Netherlands. When you come back to the Netherlands as a child, if you've always lived, went to schools, international schools, with all kinds of nationalities in another country, you have a kind of carefulness when you deal with people as a child also. But here in the Netherlands, people are extremely direct and sometimes brutal vis-a-vis each other, very outspoken, and that gives sometimes a shock when you come back in the first period. Then, of course, you adapt and you know how things work. But I recall this because I was raised myself abroad. Lived in my youth, I lived abroad, and I came back to the Netherlands to study, and it really took me up to a year before I understood the Dutch more direct environment, and then you deal with it. But so this is not a situation that's always easy, and you have children that really have difficulties with it, and then of course you have to find solutions for that.
Yeah.
So it's quite challenging from that point of view. Of course, also with a partner, it's not always easy. We lived in countries where it was very difficult for partners to find a job. As a partner, you can only find a job if there's a bilateral agreement between the 2 countries that would allow a partner with her or his professional background to work in certain areas. And very often this is extremely limited or simply prohibited because you are seen as a danger in the labor market of the country in question. So this is not always easy. Yeah.
And for yourself, I mean, you grew up living in different countries, so I can imagine it's pretty easy for you to, move abroad again, to build up a new life somewhere, especially with your partner as a rock by your side. What are some of the challenges that you faced for you personally throughout your career? Because I also know that you had a hard time in Turkey when there was a very strong political situation, and the Turkish government declared you persona non grata, if I'm not mistaken. How was that for you to deal with on a personal note?
Well, this is what I said referred to earlier on, that not everything is a success or a victory, and something to do with you, but you're simply the pawn in a bigger game. So this was a very frustrating situation. Well, the funny thing was I was never declared properly persona non grata. The effect was, but I was never properly declared persona non grata. It was said after that crisis between Turkey and the Netherlands in Rotterdam in March 2017. It was basically said Ambassador Van Rij should not come back to Turkey for the time being.
Mm.
In other words, until a solution is found, until apologies were presented to the Turkish government that the Dutch government was never going to present for the things that the Turkish ministers did in Rotterdam, right? But that's so you are then all of a sudden out of your area of comfort zone is not the right word, but you cannot do the work you're supposed to do. Of course, I stayed on as ambassador, but I was operating like we do today by Zoom every day. I was talking to my team from The Hague, because I was in The Hague at the moment the crisis erupted, talking to my team, my management team in the embassy in Ankara, and take the solutions, because the government refused to withdraw me. And that situation took about a year. Now, in the beginning, this was a kind of overwhelming situation, because what's going on? All my belongings are there, including clothes, books, personal belongings, and I was not allowed to return. So without being called off as a persona non grata, because then I would have moved everything out. But this was a kind of between situation that took up to a year. And so that was a very uncomfortable situation. Then it's important that you have another issue that you have as a diplomat, what you need to have. You have to be resistant and have a very thick skin. It's very basic. In other words, you have to be confident in yourself up to a certain degree. Said, okay, this is happening. It's not my mistake, but everybody looks at me. And what can I do about it? So I got a lot of support from the ministry. They helped me there to deal with the situation. I had some support in the ministry to do my job as an ambassador with. And of course, at the same time, some of my colleagues were negotiating a way out. But it was an uncomfortable situation. And we fortunately had our apartment here in The Hague, which we always kept as a place where we could come back for holidays. So I didn't have to stay in a hotel room for a year. My wife, so I could stay in our own apartment, and they were very helpful that I could get out things of the, I had all kinds of furniture in stock in a reserve here, in a depository. And I was able to take things out, which under the rules was not always possible. But all these things, they were very helpful. And that helps, of course, when you get the institutional support. But at the time, it was an uncomfortable situation, of course. And certainly you feel powerless. You cannot move, you cannot do your work in a proper way. At the same time, you have to keep a stiff upper lip and keep the people motivating who are sitting there on the other side, right? The embassy, I had to give the right example. So that sometimes is uncomfortable and goes against your nature, because you want to become very angry, and it doesn't work, right? So you have to do that. So at the same time, of course, the ministry found me a temporary job that I could combine with the persona non grata situation, which was roving ambassador at large. So I did all kinds of interesting trips and negotiations on behalf of the government, political negotiations with Brazil, with Peru, and with Tunisia. I did negotiations with the OAS in Mexico, and different other jobs. So I wasn't bored. So that was very nice. They could have said, well, just wait, but they helped me with an activity that was in line with, let's say, my experiences and my capabilities. So that was good. It was a good support, institutional support from the ministry. So that's what the situation was, but it was extremely uncomfortable. And the upside of this was, of course, that we were for a full year in The Hague, a little bit over a year in The Hague, so we could see our children much more often. You see, so that there's always the other side of the story as well.
It's always a bright side. Okay, maybe because we are talking now for, I think, over an hour already, but maybe two questions to round up. Something that is really close to my heart was my homecoming back to the Netherlands after Brazil. For me, it was quite tough. It was a reverse culture shock. It took me a full year, I think, to overcome that. And how is that for you now that you're also retired and you're not doing the job anymore? You're not going abroad as an ambassador anymore. How was your homecoming for you?
After Brazil, my last posting was about 3 years, and of course that had been heavily marked by the combination of the political situation in Brazil. We have President Bolsonaro. That was politically complicated because the usually rather fluid relationship with many countries in Europe was more complicated for the political reasons of the nature of that government.
Yeah.
Which didn't mean we had very good relations with civil servants and also with politicians, but between governments it was more and more complicated. This was one context. The other context was the COVID, the corona epidemic, which meant that when I came back, basically we were sort of the high point, the high level of the COVID. We were getting out of the COVID curve, but it was still extremely, you had to be very cautious. So I came back in a situation already of a certain crisis. We had just lost the colleague that you referred to earlier on. I was downgrading the embassy. Only the non-essential staff had already been sent back to The Hague because there was a congestion in the health sector in Brazil. So we were operating in a crisis mode. So under those circumstances, I traveled back, and then you arrive in the Netherlands and everything is relatively normal, although we were also getting out of the corona, let's say, the corona habit, but still very cautious, of course. But everything was very well organized. When you come back, you see all these things that make this country a paradise, as I've said earlier. At the same time, you have a lot of adrenaline in a crisis situation, and the adrenaline was leading up. So I remember I was pretty tired when I came back. So you have kind of a general tiredness in the first weeks, but caught up quickly. I never had this problem of the black hole that sometimes they refer to. When you have worked very hard and you retire, and then all of a sudden you stop, and then there's nothing. I never had that because I've always had sufficient energy outside my proper work as a historian, reading and talking to people and following things. So I have a large group of friends, also here in The Hague, but in international. So I never a problem there. But you have to go to a different rhythm. It's important to have, when you come back, to build up a new rhythm, a new routine. As I said, in the mornings I work a little bit on my computer. I do emails. I follow the news, and then very often I go and have lunch with some old friends to catch up. I've renewed some of my old friendships of when the time I was studying history. So things like that. And at one stage, I was invited by the Hague Center for Strategic Studies to help them as a strategic advisor, also giving briefings to the Dutch press on certain issues when they request a comment from the HCSS. Now, this is not a 9-to-5 job, but it's nice, and it puts you in a fraternity of people, or a sorority of people who deal with international issues, which after all has been a lot of my life in the last 40 years. So this is one thing. Of course, very important is that my wife and we had also to find a balance because we are living together. We see each other most of the day. And my wife finally found a job. She says, "Okay, my turn."
Yeah, I like that.
She works here now in the health sector. And so we have both adapted to the new situation. We see our children more often, our grandchildren. We have 3 grandchildren. So you cope with that. But it's it takes a little time to make the conversion, but in the end, I never had too much of a problem there. And I've been writing a little bit for myself and trying to work with some of the experiences that I have as an international negotiator. So I give some speeches and presentations to students and others on being a diplomat.
Nice. So you keep yourself busy still.
Yeah.
Very good. Okay, so the last question that I asked to all my guests on the show, and that is, what tip or hack do you have to make living or traveling abroad easier?
Well, I would say when you go and live somewhere far away abroad, start with the disposition that things are different. They sometimes say this famous phrase, the past is a different country, they do things differently there.
Mm-hmm.
Famous opening line of the book Being There. You can also say living abroad is really a different thing. They do really things differently there. That means you have to start with an open mind, forget about many of the things you deal with in the Netherlands, in our case. Forget about a lot of that and leave with an open mind. And don't saying, I'm going to implement my own norms in this society where I'm going to live for the next 4, 5, 6, 10 years. Start with an open mind. And as I said earlier on in the beginning, be curious. Try to, when you meet people abroad, don't take positions too quickly. Wait a little bit. And when you discuss certain issues, try to understand why that person is using those pictures or those images, giving you a message. Listen very carefully to the words. Listen very carefully to what the other people say when you meet them, even in very parochial things and very simple things. It's not always the deep issues of life. It can be very small signals. Have an open mind and be curious. I think those are the two most important things that you have to take with you as a diplomat or as an expat, I would say.
I like it a lot. Thank you so much for sharing. Kees, I'm really glad that you were on the show. Thank you so much. I loved hearing about your diplomacy career, your experience as an ambassador. I'm sure it's very relevant and interesting for the people listening too. I know there are sometimes people listening who also want to pursue a career in diplomacy, so this might be very useful for them too. So thank you so much, and I'm sure I will see you again. But for now, thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and good luck with your work.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.